Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Debunking the Missionaries with Rabbi Moshe Shulman. Welcome back, Rabbi. It's been a long minute. Good to see you again. Are you there with us?
You're not going live on YouTube, I see. Okay.
Oh, yeah. This is totally live on YouTube.
Let's see you there.
Yes, sir. There it is, right there. It's all hot. I'm following it. You can take my word on it. We are live.
I want to get there only because I want to see people.
Sure.
As you probably understand.
No problem. So, today's topic, once again, picking up where we left off before.
Yeah, we're picking up where we left off before. We have two issues. I want to get to the...
First, the title, Is the New Testament Real History? There we go. All right. And...
Okay, said hello. So you see I'm here. Okay. Yeah, we're going to finish with... excuse me. We're going to do some more work on the New Testament. Is it historical? Now, we've been examining until now specifically the one issue of what appears in Matthew and Luke, the virgin birth. Okay. And examining it to see, first of all, how they disagree with each other, and second of all, looking at each one to see if there's the accuracy of it. Is it really accurate what it says, truthfully? Is it truth or not? So we've been going through Luke. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of vacation time in between. You've been away, I've been away, stuff like that. So it's sort of made much of a problem. What I want to do is clean up a couple more issues, and then I want to go back to the one that is the main one of discussion. That's the census that appears in Luke 2, 1 through 5. Okay? And once we've done that, then we will see what the time is. We have a very interesting historical error in the book of Acts. And then we'll take it from there. We've got a lot of other stuff. Okay. Then we will pick up, in the end, we're going to try and get to, once we finish the New Testament history, obviously we cannot deal with New Testament history if we don't do an examination of the resurrection. So we would do an examination and comparison between the Gospels with regards to the events of the arrest, trial, and resurrection of Jesus.
Nice.
So that will be very in-depth, and we'll get through it. After that, we will go to, nowadays is a famous argument that is out there about the minimal fact theory of proving that the resurrection is a historical fact, and we're going to deal with that also, debunk that. Okay, so let's go back to where we were holding. We are now dealing with Luke. Luke 2, verse 18. Again, as we examine this, our point here is not to be nitpicking, but to point out where a story does not seem to hold together, that it would fail a certain type of test for historicity when an author or when a story doesn't seem to fit together. So let's look at verse 18. And all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured all these words and pondered them in her heart. And so the question is, why is there such wonder going on here, since after all, Mary and Joseph already heard everything that was going on? And why did Mary have to ponder anything? She had already had a revelation from an angel that she was supposed to give birth to a child. That's the whole thing is. That's the whole thing is about. In Matthew, Joseph is given the revelation, but here in Luke, Mary is given the revelation. So why is it anything of a wonder or something that she has to keep to heart? She'd already had this revealed from an angel, before the child was even born. Okay, now we want to go on to something else. Again, we're just going to jump some of these. Some of these are small, but this one now we're in verse 22 through 24. Now remember what we're talking about here is that Luke is supposed to be a master historian. I mean, in the beginning, he talks about that he's got many sources, that he's used as sources, So the question is, if he's used the sources and it's supposed to match the story, we would assume that his story would be accurate. Okay, so let's read what we have here. When the time came for their purification according to the law of Moses, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male shall be designated as holy to the Lord. And they offered a sacrifice according to what is stated in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Now, what they're talking about here, and what is the problem, is that Luke is mixing up 2 different things. Now, in the Torah, there's 2 laws. Let me go through. The first one is when a woman gives birth, she has a certain amount of days of purification. We find this in Leviticus 12, verse 1 through 8. So if I might read it very quickly here. Now again, the point here is that his sources should have told him this. Okay, Shem saying, speaks to children saying, when a woman conceives and gives birth to a male, she shall be contaminated for a 7-day period. As during the days of her separation from him, shall be contaminated. So, first 7 days after a woman gives birth, she is considered to be separated. On the 8th day, the flesh of foreskin shall be circumcised. The 8th day is circumcision. For 33 days, she shall remain in blood of purity, meaning that after the 7 days, another 33 days, she may not touch anything sacred, and she may not enter the sanctuary until the completion of days of purity. So that means 40 days. Now, if she gives birth to a female, she shall be contaminated for 2 weeks, as during her separation for 60 days, she shall remain in blood of purity. So what happens is, for a boy, this period of purification takes 40 days to be purified. For a girl, it takes 80 days to be purified. Now, what happens after that? Upon the completion of days of purity for a son or a daughter, she shall bring a sheep within its first year for a burnt offering, a young dove or a turtle dove for a sin offering. To the end of the tent of meeting, to the Kohen, he shall offer it before the Hashem and atone for her, and shall be purified from the source of blood. Okay, fine. So he talks about what it is. If she can afford a sheep, she should bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves, one for a burnt offering for a sin. So she can bring 2, if she's too poor. But it's either turtle doves or regular doves, one for burnt and perfect. Okay? So that's what we see here in the Torah. So let's go back to what we saw there, because we're going to see that there's a problem. When the time came for the purification according to the law of Moses, they brought up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male shall be designated holy to the Lord. Now, this is very interesting. This is actually Exodus 13:2, and we're going to look at that for a second. And they offered a sacrifice according to what is stated in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Apparently, she was poor, and so she could not afford the animal part of the sacrifice, so she was able to bring 2 turtle doves. It should have been 2 young pigeons. It says pigeons and turtle doves. Those of you who live in New York like I do and see pigeons would not mistake a pigeon for a dove, that's for sure. Okay? Now, it doesn't say how long it is, but it's actually after 40 days. Now, the verse here that's quoted, every firstborn male shall be designated as holy to the Lord, that has to do with something else. So let's read what he says here. They brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. He had to be brought to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord because the verse says, every firstborn male shall be designated holy to the Lord. Now, according to that, this verse is talking about having to bring the child to Jerusalem, and also, at the same time, they're supposed to bring a sacrifice. Well, we know about the sacrifice. The sacrifice is after 40 days. But if we look at Exodus 13:2, what do we see there? It says, Hashem spoke to him, saying, sanctify to me every firstborn, the first issue of every womb among the children of Israel. Man of beast is mine. So this is the redemption of the firstborn. Now, what does this entail? Well, we have to look at Numbers, verse 18, 15 to 16 to see what this means. Every first issue of womb of any flesh that they offer unto Hashem, whether man or beast, shall be yours. Meaning, but you shall surely redeem the firstborn of man, and the firstborn of your beast which you shall redeem. So this is talking about redemption of the firstborn in 752. Those that are to be redeemed from 1 month shall you redeem according to the valuation, 5 silver shekels, the sacred shekel, it is 20 ger. It's a measurement. So, at 1 month, you're supposed to do it. Nothing about going to Jerusalem. It's not necessary to go to Jerusalem. It's done in every place. In fact, until today, this rite is fulfilled. It's called redemption of the firstborn. They give 5 shekels to a Kohen, and the child is redeemed. But that has nothing to do with Leviticus 12, 1 through 8. Leviticus 12, 1 through 8 has to do with the sacrifice for the mother who gives birth to be purified. So again, let's take a look, and we can see that there are multiple errors here that are involved. So when the time came for their purification, according to Moses, this is Leviticus. As we mentioned there, this is Leviticus 12, that she has to purify herself. They brought him up to Jerusalem, presented him to the Lord. Why did you? His being brought up has nothing to do with the Lord. She is supposed to go up. The child could stay home with the father. She has to go up and do a purification. The child doesn't have to go there. And this, as is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male shall be designated as holy to Hashem. Lord, that's true, but that is not referring to her obligation to go and to be presented to the Lord, go to the temple, and to bring the sacrifice there. That has to be the child, as we see in Numbers, that when it's 20, when it's a month old, 30 days old, it's supposed to be redeemed from the priest, not in the temple. It could be any priest, it could be a local priest. And they offered a sacrifice according to what is stated in the law of the Lord. That is true. That is Leviticus 13. But that's not Leviticus 12, Exodus 12, which is what the reference is here. These are two different issues that are getting mixed together and confused by Luke. A pair of doves should young pigeons should have been doves, but that's a minor issue in the whole problem here. The problem here is that Luke is describing something that was supposed to have happened from his sources, but the sources have it all wrong. Sources are wrong. So how can we rely upon it? We're talking about some historical. This is historical. There's no place to. There's no way to say that no answer for what you can say. It's just mixing up what is being done. It's mixing up what it says in the Torah. Okay, that's all of what I wanted to say on that. Not very much to say on it, but it's important to understand. Again, when we're talking about Luke as being a historian. Historian then meant that you had your sources and you brought your sources together and you used sources that were reliable, and you yourself had to be knowledgeable enough in order to fix in case sources had an error in it. And here we see that Luke has clearly garbled it up and confused all the things in it. Okay, let's look now. I have another one here, chapter 2, verse 33. Now, what happened here is you had a fellow named Shimon, who prophesied and said about Jesus being the Lord's Messiah and things like that. So then you see in verse 33, and the child's father and mother were amazed at what was being said about him. Now, and here we have two things. First of all, of course, there's the problem of why Joseph is called his father. That itself is a problem. After all, the virgin birth, he's not supposed to be father. How can he be called his father? Okay, that's one thing. But most importantly is, what are they amazed about? What is there to be amazed about that Jesus is supposed to be the Messiah, supposed to be someone who's supposed to help? What is there to be amazed about? Both of them were told. Both of them had been informed earlier, Joseph and Matthew and Mary and Luke, as to who Jesus was going to be. Where is the point of amazement? What is the amazement about it? Now, if they said they were happy and joyful that people recognized the greatness of their child, that they knew was going to happen. But that's not amazement. Amazement means you're amazed at something wonderful, it's something you didn't know about, whatever. But why amazement? There's no call for amazement here. They were already revealed the whole thing. Okay, let's continue one more. Now, in verse 37, we see something very interesting. There was a prophet, Anna, the daughter of Phanuel, of the tribe of Asher. She was of a great age, having lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and as a widow at the age of 84. She never left the temple but worshipped there with fasting and prayer night and day. First of all, the temple was not open night and day for everybody. Sometimes it was closed. In fact, the Levites who were at the gates actually closed the gates. But more important than that, a woman would never be allowed to be there night and day for any amount of time. Or anybody else, really, for the matter, because what happens is various impurities that people have force them not to be able to be there. Even you could touch something and become impure that you shouldn't be there. To be there day and night is something that's not really so much of a possibility. Second. Okay. Again, that's more of a minor point than some of the other things, but it's important also to note when there are things here that are problematic. Now what I'd like to do is return to Luke 2, verse 1 through 5. This is very important. It's something that is of contention and argued about many times. So I would like to go through it again, read it, chapter 2, verse 1 through 5, explain clearly what it says there, and then let's analyze it to whether what here is reflected is historical fact. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. Now, you shouldn't take this too literally. He did not say that in China or in India or in North or South America that it had to be done. When you were there in Rome, the whole world meant all of Rome. Okay, so don't want somebody to be nitpicking here. All the world, it didn't mean all the world. It didn't happen in Africa and in this way. No, what it meant was in the Roman world, which was for Romans because that was the world. Anybody outside the world was a barbarian. It's basically they were almost subhuman. So what it says here, in those days, the decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. So Augustus gives a decree. Not a local decree, but a empire-wide decree. So that's the first thing we should remember. Okay, this was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. So here it's giving us a time frame. We've got one time frame, of course, when Augustus was king, was emperor. Okay, and then we're given another thing. Quirinius. My Latin is non-existent, so you have to forgive me, was governor of Syria. So we know a second thing when this particular person was the governor of Syria. Two things. So all went to their own towns to be registered. So they went to their own towns. Okay. Now they clarified a little bit more. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth. Now Joseph's hometown was Nazareth. Remember, in Luke, Joseph's hometown is Nazareth and goes to Bethlehem. But in Matthew, Joseph's hometown appears to have been Bethlehem, and he never went there. He only goes to Nazareth when he's fleeing from Judea to go to the Galilee. So Joseph went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem. So again, they're telling Galilee was separate from Judea, not under Herod, but it was later on separated. After Herod died, Galilee and Judea were actually two different places. Under Herod, they were actually one place. So this, of course, causes a little bit of a problem here, that, of course, the description here basically seems to be talking about something that wasn't under Herod, but you could, by a stretch, you could maybe put something in. To the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was a den of the house and the family of David. Now, what we're seeing here is that with this census, okay, it was under Augustus in a certain time, and they went to towns to be registered, but they didn't go to their hometown. This verse makes it quite clear. They did not go to their hometown, which of course for Joseph would mean he would stay in Nazareth. So he didn't go to his own town, his hometown. No, he had to go to the city of his ancestor David, from whom he was descended. That is the town that he has to register in. Just want to think about that. And he went to be registered with Mary, with whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. Okay, so that's what the story is there. So let's analyze this. There are definitely certain problems. One of them is, as we pointed out, that when could this have been? We talked about different timings in the past, in order to make this fit within the period of time. So, Jesus lived for a certain amount of time. So we were talking about different time periods. Let me get some of these notes out that I have here. So, for example, we were discussing this, and what we said here was that his earliest birth would be, as if we would assume that Jesus could have died in the 26th CE, in the first year of Pilate, would have made it 8 BCE. That's the earliest his birth could have been. Okay? However, the latest birth would have been 4 BCE, making his death 30 CE. This, of course, if you don't notice, causes a little bit of the problem that we have, because he was supposedly executed, according to some, he would have been executed at 33, and this is a problem that we, of course, mentioned earlier. So what we're trying to do is get this within 8 BCE and 4 BCE, as being the time when it was. So here we have that Augustus made a worldwide registration, a census. Okay. Now, we do know Augustus himself actually wrote an autobiography. And in his autobiography, he mentions that he did actually make worldwide censuses. Now, the purpose of the census, of course, was in order to raise money to see how much, they had to ask from different people and things, et cetera, like that. So Augustus mentions that there were 3 censuses that he did make. And it's in his autobiography. I read it, I saw it before and checked it out. The first one was in 28 BCE, much, much too early. For Jesus when 30, it doesn't work out, especially because we're going to be linking things together with John the Baptist. John the Baptist was 6 months older than him, so that's not likely. Another one was 14 CE in the Common Era. That also is not going to work out, because to be 30 years old would have made him 34 CE, and 30 CE, 30 years would have been 44 CE, which is after Pilate, so that's not going to be a possibility. The other one is 8 BCE. Now that is a possibility, doichik. That's a very problematic. Why? Because if we say it was 8 BCE, that means the crucifixion ends up being 26 CE. And that, we're going to see later, for many reasons, is a little bit on the early side and a little bit problematic. Okay? So we have a problem with that. Second, in verse 3, he says, all went to their own towns to be registered. Now that is something we do know. We do know that when registration was required, you would have to go to your town. So if, say, for example, if Joseph had been in Jerusalem, he would have been required by the law to have gone back to Nazareth, which was his hometown. That's where he lived. Okay? So theoretically, that could have been correct. The problem is when we get to verse 4. Because, of course, Luke wants him to be born in Bethlehem, because Matthew hasn't born in Bethlehem. He wants him. So how can he be born in Bethlehem? Well, Luke uses the census and says that he had to go to Bethlehem because he was descended from David. Now, that's a problem. The reason why it's a problem is that, first of all, we know the city of David, as we mentioned earlier, we're talking about errors. The city of David was not Bethlehem. The city of David is Jerusalem. Ir David, it's called Jerusalem. If you go to Jerusalem nowadays, you will see a place called Ir David. It's called Jerusalem. Why? Because when David was born, his father's home city was, his father Yeshai, his home city was Bethlehem. That's where David was born. However, when he got older and even when he started to be a king, he wasn't king from Bethlehem. He was king in Hebron. And then from Hebron, he went to Jerusalem. And there he was king. Excuse me. His son was king after him. Solomon was king. And his grandson, the kingdom split under him. But the kingdom, the royal line of King David, ruled in Jerusalem. They were not kings in Bethlehem. Bethlehem was not the city of David at any time. In fact, they continued there in Jerusalem as their city, as the city of David, until the exile. And the royal family was exiled to Babylonia. And in fact, the royal family stayed in Babylonia. They became, the royal family lost its rulership as things, but under the Babylonians and later the Persians, and even the early Muslims, there was an office called the head of the exile, which was, in fact, the direct descendants of, through the male line, direct descendants of the Davidic royal family. And they were in Babylonia. At that time, it would have been Persia. But at no time was Bethlehem the city of David. Never. It was the birthplace of David. That's true. Now, how are we to understand this? There's multiple problems here. Let's say that what we're saying is Joseph had to go to the birthplace of his ancestor hundreds of years before. Ancestor hundreds of years before. That makes absolutely no sense. It's totally inane. First of all, we know of no example. But second, just think about it logically. Okay? Let's just go back 500 years. Just 500 years. It's much more than 500 years, but 500 years, let's go. You go back 500 years, what if somebody tells you that you need to go back to the birthplace of your ancestor 500 years ago, and you have to register for a census? First of all, it's the most craziest idea you can ever think of. And the Romans, they were not crazy people. They were quite normal and intelligent. They wouldn't have a crazy type thing. Going back to your city where you live to register there was very normal, as verse 3 does make sense. Verse 3 would be correct. Verse 4 is where Luke goes out into I don't know what kind of world of crazy history, because it's fantasy history. It could never happen. Joseph was not born in Bethlehem. He was born in Nazareth. He was from Nazareth. That was his hometown. Okay, there's no indication, and the verse says specifically the reason why he's going is not because he was born there. If it said he was born there, maybe it said well, your birthplace, but that also was not the case. Roman census did not do that. They did require you to go back to your town. So if you happen to be in a different town, if you lived in Jerusalem and you happen to be in the Galil for some reason, they would order you to register your own town. That would be a possibility. Okay, but they never tell you to go back there. And the city of David, of course, was not that. And the birth of David, going back hundreds of years, and thinking of it in a logical way. Imagine what would happen in the Roman Empire if everybody had to go back 500 plus years to the birthplace of their ancestors, or even the place where the ancestors lived 500 years ago. It would be a massive, traffic jam of people traveling from one place to another. It'd be a phenomenal traffic jam. How would they be able to? Where were they meant to go? Many people wouldn't even know where to go to. It's something that, if you think about it, cannot be. So how could Luke write such a thing that's so beyond understanding? Think, for somebody who's claimed to be a historian to write something that is totally unbelievable, it's absolutely. I'm not saying that Luke himself fabricated. Maybe he got it from a source. So he got it from a source that was fabricated, not unreliable. So how can we rely on it for a historical thing when it's got something so way out there? Just totally way out there. Okay. Again, verse 3 is fine. If it was verse 3 and not verse 4, and he said somebody that, whatever, I don't know, he would be in Nazareth instead of Bethlehem because Luke doesn't have him in Bethlehem, because of sin. But if you had that, okay, we can find that would be historical. But verse 4 is totally non-historical. It's totally non-factual. Okay, there is never ever in Rome, nor could there never ever be in Rome, a census which required you to go to a home city or birthplace of an ancestor over 500 years beforehand. In fact, if memory serves me, The Roman Republic Rome didn't even exist at that time when David was king. I believe that Rome, and certainly not the Roman Republic, did not even exist when David was king. How could it do this? This is something that, if you're going to be intellectually honest with yourself, you're going to have to say, Luke Blewett is a historian. This just cannot be. He wasn't even thinking what he was writing. It shows he doesn't know the Bible, because he doesn't know that Ir David is not Bethlehem, it's Jerusalem. And he doesn't know that David didn't live there, that he was king in heaven and then he was king in Jerusalem, and all his descendants were kings in Jerusalem. They weren't king. They didn't live in Bethlehem. That he's missing the biblical knowledge, and he's missing common sense as a historian to realize, this source it's got a mistake in it, and he puts it in. And this is a digma. This is an example of how we have to look at the New Testament writers as historians. They just don't really get the concept of history like we have now, where you're trying to be accurate. This defies any definition of accuracy you could ever have. Now, there are still a number of problems that I didn't bring up about this, besides the obvious lack of truth in this verse. This verse is absolutely not possible to be true. It defies all logic and defies anything. Okay? There may have been different reasons. And Joseph may, in fact, have been in Bethlehem. Maybe Matthew was right that Joseph actually lived in Bethlehem. But what Luke has here is just not historical. And under no stretch of them can you make it historical to say that there was a census from Rome that required them to go there. Now, there are a few other things that I want to mention about here that are problematic. One of them is, there's actually two related to each other. One of them is Herod was a client king. Now, client kings were very different than being parts of the empire. Okay? A part of the empire was subject to direct taxation. Okay. So, for example, when the kings were actually deposed, Rome sent an official there. His major job was to do two things. Number one, raise taxes to send to the capital. And number two was to ensure that there were no rebellions, no revolts. Those are two jobs. Raise taxes. Now, a client king would pay tribute, protection money, to Rome, in order that Roman protection would ensure, and the Roman authorities would choose out who would be king, who would be able to rule in there. That was part of what the deal was. But in essence, they ran everything as long as they paid their tribute whenever they had to do it, and nobody really cared how they raised the money. But they weren't subject to census. That is a general rule. There's some that say that maybe not, because Herod wasn't in such good standing. But that's not certain. That's just a guess. Okay. Now, what's even more important is we know that but from Josephus, that there was in fact a census in 64 AD in Judea. And at the time, Quirinius was actually the governor there. Now, the claim that Quirinius was governor when Herod was there has no foundation to it. He was actually, at that time, he was a military general in a place called Galatia, which is in Turkey. It's not associated with Syria. Okay? He was there from 21 to 1 BCE. That's what his job was. He was a military leader, military attaché, something like that there, but he was not there. He was later on in 6 AD when Archelaus was deposed and Rome took direct control. Quirinius was made the governor and took control of that. So the mentioning of Quirinius in 2 is something that is subject to a lot of questions of it. There's arguments back and forth that maybe he was there or not, but really none of them can have him, none of them can place him any closer than Turkey to there until he comes there later. Okay, again, that's much of a more minor talk. But what the problem is, in 6 AD, when Quirinius was the governor, and he did have a census, something happened. The Jewish people revolted. Why did the Jewish people revolt? Judaism has a thing about making a census. We see by King David that he made a census, and it brought a plague. So the Jewish people do not make a census. They don't like counting themselves. They do a lot of things in order to avoid counting themselves. So when there was a census in 6 AD, there was a revolt. The Jewish people revolted. Now, the question is, during that previous supposed census there was, where was the revolt? All of a sudden, people became very, very religious later and revolted, and before they didn't, as if it was harder to revolt against Herod than it would be against Rome with its multiple legions. It reminds me of, there's a Sherlock Holmes story. So the guy from Scotland Yard, Sherlock Holmes investigates everything, and he asks him to give him advice, and he says, you should consider the incident with the dogs in the night. So he said, but the dogs didn't do anything tonight. He says, that was the incident. That was the interesting incident. The interesting incident that occurred during a supposed census was there was no rebellion. So why wasn't there rebellion? Because there wasn't a census. Had there been a census, they would have rebelled then too. Because the Jewish people always rebelled. There's lots of stories, you'll see there's lots of stories where the people felt that the religious rights were being abolished. The whole story of Hanukkah is all about the religious rights of the Jewish people having been violated. And they rose up in rebellion because the religious rights were violated. And we see constantly, just see many, many stories. One of my favorite stories is once the Romans were in the temple, and there was one Roman guard who was a real chitzpanyak. I don't know the translate chitzpanyak is, but I tell you what he did. You understand? What he did, he turned around and pulled his pants down and showed it to the people. And just in the temple area there was guarding. He did that. People got furious and there was a riot. I mean, that's what happened in Judea. Why do you think the Romans were so worried about Judea that they put the guards there every Passover? Because they're worried over the Jewish people were very, were very quick to revolt when their religious rights were being, infringed. There are many stories of that. Josephus brings a wonderful. I love this story because it's beautiful. Under Caligula, I don't know if I said it before, but it's a wonderful story Josephus brings. Because first of all, it shows how Hashem watch out for people, that they shouldn't come to harm when they do good for the Jewish people. Caligula was basically bonkers. He was crazy. And so he decreed that a statue of him should be put in every place, including the temple in Jerusalem. Well, anybody who knows anything in the temple of Jerusalem knows no statues whatsoever. Can't be any statues. Not possible. So the law came down from Caligula, went to the governor there, and the governor was going to, he didn't really know how serious the situation was. He said he was going to do it. So when it came to do it, the Jewish people in Jerusalem all laid themselves down on the highway to block him from going. And so the person, I don't remember his name offhand, I'd have to look it up, but it's not really important the name. Although it's good to tell stories of people who act in righteous ways like that, even if they're idol worshippers, Hashem never forgets, always rewards people. So they were there, and he said, listen, you're going to have to kill all of us to get there. Now this guy was, he was a normal guy. He wasn't, crazy. He said, I can't kill all these hundreds of thousands of people. So what he did is he sat down and wrote a letter to Caligula. He realized what was going on. I said, listen, Caligula, what's going on? The only way I can do is if I can't kill all these people. It's just not normal. So Caligula wrote him a letter. He says, you're right, you don't have to kill all of them, but you have to commit suicide because you didn't listen to what I said. And he sent out the letter. Now what happened is Caligula was assassinated not long after that. And so a second letter was sent to Jerusalem to let them know that Caligula would die. Now when the emperor dies, any decree he might have had was nullified. What happened is the first letter took a long time to get there. And the second letter, Caligula died, got there beforehand. So he'd already been informed that Caligula died when he got the letter from Caligula to say he should commit suicide. And since it was nullified, he didn't have to go to suicide. That's how Hashem rewarded somebody, even an idol worshiper like that, rewarded him for showing the proper respect. That he made it so that the letter that Caligula sent first should come there last, so he shouldn't have to kill himself. Because of course he would have killed himself if he had to. But the point that I'm trying to make here is we see time and time again when the religious rights of the Jewish people were involved, they rioted. And Josephus writes all about them. But where is that? Where is that rioting? It's the dog that didn't bark in the night. That's all it is. Because there was no census. There could not have been census. If there was a census, there would have been a riot. The Jewish people were very, 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 very off the place. I mean, the whole war that led to the destruction of the temple, of course, was because of that. The war with Hadrian had to do with his restrictions on religious rights. Okay, so there we see that. So again, let's review this. Why do we have a problem with this? First, we have a problem that the time period, the only time period that fits with Augustus would be about 8 BCE, and that's pushing it. It's possible, but it's puts the probability of it being true down a little bit. Verse 2 talks Quirinus, so we mentioned that he was in Turkey, Galatia, until 1 BCE, during the period of time when there would have been the census, while he was there at the second census in 6 CE, which is mentioned in Josephus, and revolts took place at that time. Verse 3 is a verse that we say is a possibility. If there was a census by Augustus, he would have said they should go to the towns that they came from. That was true. That would have been the case. However, verse 4, when it says that Joseph had to go to the city of David, where his ancestor David was born, that's totally absurd. It's totally ahistorical. There's absolutely no way that we could reconcile that with any historical records that we know of. There was never a case whatsoever where anybody had to go to the birth city from an ancestor that far back. And in fact, it would have been impossible. It would have been seen by every single historian, whether Roman or otherwise, who wrote about that period of time, would have mentioned that Augustus made this really crazy decree that people had to go to places like that. That we don't see it is, again, a dog that didn't bark in the night. So from here we see that there is a lot of things in here that we have to say are lacking in historical fact. Okay. I see we still have some time. Let me go through one. This is a little more complicated. But I do want to try and finish this so that next week we can go being finished with what I might do is, what I think I will do is next week is actually I will review all the things with the virgin birth, try and cut it down to an hour very quickly. All the things about the virgin birth story between Matthew and Luke and the problems with each one, just go through them. And if you want to listen to the early ones, explaining it, and just go through them very quickly to get you up, because we had so much interruption between. But the last thing I want to do is not actually dealing with the virgin birth itself, but as Luke is a historian. And this is actually in the book of Acts, verse 5, 33 to 37. And let me read it. When they heard this, they were enraged and wanted to kill him. This is calling about they wanted to kill Peter. But a Pharisee in the council named Gamaliel is actually a real historical person. He was actually killed. His son was killed just before the destruction of the temple, Shimon ben Gamaliel. Shimon ben Gamaliel is actually mentioned in Josephus in his autobiography. A teacher of the law, respected by all the people. I just want to make a note here because we are going to talk about some of the problems in the New Testament. Notice that Gamaliel as a Pharisee was respected by all the people. All the people respected the Pharisees. Okay? All the people respected the Pharisees. Contrary to what you might think from the gospel accounts and everything like that, all the people loved the Pharisees. They were not considered evil or anything like that. Gamaliel, who was a leader, not just a teacher of the law, but he was a leader of them, was loved by all the people, stood up and ordered the men to be put outside for a short time. Then he said to them, and listen to this speech here, fellow Israelites, consider carefully what you propose to do to these men. For some time ago, Theudas rose up claiming to be somebody, and a number of men, about 400, joined him, but he was killed. And all who followed him were dispersed and disappointed. After him, Judas the Galilean rose up at a time of the census. This time of the census is 6 AD. And got people to follow him. He also perished. And all who followed him were scattered. So here we have Gamaliel saying this, according to Luke, our great historian. He says, first Theudas rose up, and then Judas the Galilean. Now, Judas the Galilean is placed in the time of the census, which was 6 AD or CE. And that means that Theudas was before 6 CE. Okay? Now, if we look in Josephus, we have one point of confirmation. That is in the Book of Antiquities, chapter 18, verse 1:1. Book 18, 1:1. And let me read from Josephus. Now Cyrenius, a Roman senator, and one who had gone through other magistracies, and had passed through them till he had been consul, and one who, and on other accounts, was of great dignity, came at this time to Syria. So, with a few others, being sent by Caesar to be a judge of that nation, and to take an account of the substance. This means taken when he was sent there after Archelaus was banished. Componius, also a man of the equestrian order, was sent together with him to have the supreme power of the Jews. However, Cyrenius came himself to Judea, which was now added to the province of Syria, to take an account of the subject and deposit Archelaus' money. So originally, Judea was separate under Herod, because it was a client kingdom. It was separate from Syria. Then it was added to Syria, which was a Roman province. You know, but the Jews, although at the beginning they took the reported taxation heinously, they were angry. They did leave off any further opposition by the persuading Joazar, who was the son of Boethius and high priest. So they, being overpersuaded by Joazar's words, gave an account of their states without any dispute about it. Yet there was one Judas Hagulonite of a city whose name was Gamala is in the Galileo, who taken with Sadok, a Pharisee, became zealous toward them into a revolt. So Judas, that is mentioned in Luke, is here mentioned and specifically placed in 6 CE with Archelaus. Okay, now the problem is, let's look at Theudas. Theudas is much, much later. We find him in book 20, chapter 5, number 1. Now it came to pass when Theudas was procurator of Judea, much, much later. Theudas was procurator 44 to 46, after Jesus had died even, that a certain magician whose name was named Theudas persuaded a great part of the people to take their effects with them and follow him to the river Jordan, where he told them he was a prophet and that he would, by his own command, divide the river and forward them in Israel. Many of these deluded by his word. However, Theudas did not permit them to make any advance of his wild attempt, but sent a troop of horsemen out against him, who, following upon him, unexpectedly slew many of them and took many of them alive. That happens in the time of Theudas. Theudas was 44 to 46. Contrary to what Luke has, now Luke, having lived in that time, should have known the difference. He should have known that Theudas was under Theudas, and that was 44. And Judas was earlier. So how does he get this wrong? How does he get the whole story wrong? Well, the problem is, of course, Acts 5 has an historical error. It's just not correct. So let's summarize, and next week we're going to go back over this again, all the stuff, and we'll bring all the main points. Is the virgin birth real history? Is Luke really a historian here? Okay. Now, as we mentioned, both stories have many contradictions, and next week we'll go through revert. And also, there's extremely many problematic verses. So, for example, Matthew 13:55, where Jesus called Joseph's son, sort of causes a problem with saying that it was a virgin birth. Likewise, in Joseph, in 2:33, Joseph is called Jesus' father, also a problem. And of course, when we see that they marveled or were amazed or things of that nature about the virgin birth, then, we already know that they were both told what was going on. Another verse I didn't mention to you, but Luke 2:48 also, Mary calls Joseph Jesus' father. Says your father and I. This is a verse a little bit later. It's not necessarily related to the virgin birth, but it is related to information. So what we see is that there's a lot of problems with the virgin birth narratives. They don't fit, and they have a sign of being a legend, somewhat made up, but not as being real history. Okay. I see I've ended a little bit on the earlier side. Okay. I don't want to start the next thing. The next thing we're going to talk about, we'll review the virgin birth.
Okay.
But the next part of his story is we're going to talk about, reconcile the ministry of John and Josephus with the historical events that are mentioned here.
Nice.
That's going to be the next part we do with history. But right now, I think we'll leave it here.
Okay.
And William, if we do have some questions, I guess we do have time for a few questions. If not, we can end a little bit early, whichever way works out right.
Sure. I don't see any. The only question I actually saw up here was somebody asked, "Did Snoop Dogg actually give you $5,000?"
No.
I don't know where the heck that came from, but oh well, it was in there. That's the only question I see. The rest of it, they're just kind of talking amongst themselves. So, all right, no worries. We can certainly pick up where we left off next week, no doubt about it. So, as far as that goes, everybody, I hope you guys have a great week. Rabbi, you have a great week as well, and we'll look forward
well, let's see if anybody wants to ask a question quickly. I don't want to
okay.
get off so quickly. If you do have a question you want to ask, either type it in or something like that.
I have a question. Just Noah, go ahead.
Go ahead. That's not fine. I mean, we could open up the phones, but we can take the questions here also. Like I said.
Probably only have time for one question, more than likely.
Yeah, it depends on how difficult the question is.
I'm gonna have to I have to shut down straight at 8:00 tonight because we've got an appointment later. So.
Okay, no problem.
Yep.
I have no problem with that either.
So just Noah, go ahead and type in your question if you don't mind.
Yeah, just Noah, type in your question quickly.
Andrea, thank you for your help out there. Really appreciate you. By the way. And let's see what we got here. Lee Yates, welcome. Martha. Mike Poor Federow. Hope I said that right. Who else we got here? Laura A. Thank you so much for your support. Shane Thompson. Fat Vegan, good to see you, buddy. Janice Hart. Who else am I missing here? All right. Why didn't Joseph take Mary before the council to prove jealousy?
Oh, soita. Okay, soita is not a requirement. It is something you can do. Also, soita, she has to be married. And okay, the rules of soita is like this. Soita is when a person is jealous. Okay, first of all, he has to warn her beforehand. Then there has to be witnesses that saw her actually. So what she says is, I mean, I don't even know how that would work out here. But what happens, let's say Joseph says, okay, I don't want you to be alone in any place with Chaim because I think you're going to do things immoral. Okay? And then two witnesses come and say, I saw Mary in the room with Chaim. Both of them say that. Okay? Then they could bring her to this something called soita, where there's a whole ceremony of doing things. Okay? But in this case, no, it would only settle it if it was under the proper conditions. The conditions have to be that he has to have warned her, and then she had violated the warning. Then it would work. In this case, what kind of warning would say that you should not be alone with the Holy Spirit? I mean that doesn't make sense according to the story. It just wouldn't fit. The Torah works like that. It requires witnesses. It requires certain things. If the witnesses don't exist, then you can't do it.
Okay.
No, it would not have settled the issue. There's many things that would have not settled the issue, and certainly if it hadn't been that, there are a lot of things that make it so that the water doesn't work. And certainly an issue where he had not actually said, do not be with this person, and not putting in that it would be obligation, that would certainly be a case in which the waters would not have worked in that case anyways. So, but that's the case. It would not have worked in the first case. It wouldn't be even a case. I mean, no priest would do it, because remember, part of the ceremony is that you erase God's name, which is a very, very serious thing. So unless unless it was an absolute requirement, then they wouldn't do that. And there's a whole ceremony. The Talmud talks about what they did. The Mishnah talks about what they did. They would ask her, "Are you sure you did it? Remember, God's name is. If you did it, you should admit that you did it. And because God's name will be wiped out." I mean, it's a very serious thing. It's not that's something to be taken lightly. It's not just It's not just the kind of test you take flippantly. Okay, this is something that's a very serious issue.
Right. Gotcha. Good.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
That's always been an intriguing topic for sure, for so many.
Yeah, it's a very, very in the Talmud. It's a very, very interesting secta, and it's a very interesting thing.
So basically, you can't take the woman before the court unless you have the witnesses, right?
First you have to warn her.
Okay. And
the warning should be before witnesses, and then if she violates it in front of witnesses, then you can bring her. But if there's not, then you can't, because it hasn't come about the conditions.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Oh, okay. Just putting her away means, okay. You have to remember, under biblical law, engagement and marriage are different than what we have now. There's a formal type of engagement where you give a contract to the woman, and she is legally tied to you, meaning that either you have to get married or you have to get divorced. Okay? They're not married yet, but you have a legal, relationship which requires a divorce. So when it says putting her away, it means that they were engaged, meaning they had that legal engagement. But the question was, should he put her away because she was pregnant, not by him? Or should, marriage and, but married, everybody thought, well, he couldn't wait until he got married.
Okay, right.
Okay.
Cool. Good answers. All right. Well, I guess that probably
easy question. These guys give me softball questions.
Take it easy on you. Well, we've got like 2 minutes left, so we'll probably go and wrap it up here. So, Rabbi, thanks again for your...
So again, next week,
yes,
Hashem, what we'll do is, because of all the breaks in between, I will go over my notes and, in short, just give the most important points as to the contradictions between Matthew and Luke, and as to why we should not consider it as being historically accurate.
Okay, very good. That sounds like a plan. All right, you guys. Thanks again for y'all tuning in this week. Be sure to like the videos, share them, do whatever you can to kind of help YouTube search algorithms on when people search for titles and stuff. So, you guys, I appreciate it. And see you all tomorrow. Yes, indeed, Andrea. That's correct. We will see you guys tomorrow for a couple more shows. So, stay tuned. We'll see you next week. Peace out, everybody. Or see you tomorrow and next week, too. Later. Ooh, long day. See you, Rabbi.
Okay, see you.